All right. So today I am talking to Tara Robertson. She's currently the CMO at teamwork.com. And before that, she was the head of customer marketing at Sprout Social and VP of marketing at Hotjar. Welcome to the show, Tara. It's great to have you.
Oh, thank you so much. I'm really excited to be here.
Me too. We'll be talking a lot about how to set up teams and run marketing teams, and so that's kind of where I want to start as well. So to give us a bit of context, like what does teamwork do, and how does marketing kind of fit into the overall organization?
Sure. So Teamwork is a project management platform. We've been around for quite some time, bootstrapped business have grown pretty significantly over the last few years, exploring, kind of looking at a first round of funding and what that could look like for our business to continue to elevate our growth. When it comes to marketing is really the starting engine for a lot of our customer journey. We are primarily servicing the SMB to agency space. We certainly work with some mid-market and enterprise businesses and across the entire globe. But I'd say for the most part, 99% of our revenue starts from a trial. And so marketing's role when it comes to servicing within the SaaS industry and servicing our own platform is really hand in hand the starting point for revenue. We also have a sales assisted funnel as well as a self-serve funnel. So while marketing is responsible for driving a lot of our trials, we also have a revenue function within our department that we are solely focused on, that never touches sales and aligns really closely with our partnership within product. So I'd say we truly just manage essentially two different funnels and revenue across the board, and are working on all the different stages that you'd expect between attracting, driving awareness, to then driving them through the funnel and beyond.
And that's interesting. So how does that look like if you basically serving two funnels? Is this one team, or do you have them kind of separated into two teams? If you say 99% is coming from trials.
It's a great question. And honestly, so I'm on month 4 at Teamwork, just started several months back. And that was one of the first questions that I had as I was thinking on, stage 1 is coming in and thinking about not just where we are today, but how do we grow into where we want to be over the next 5 years and establishing our marketing org structure. And so a big question that I had that I continue to spend a lot of time networking and talking to other people in the industry is, when you have two funnels, do you have two teams? I landed on no. We do have one team, but we've got an outcome-focused marketing team with how we're scaling. So we just brought on a head of brand, a head of revenue marketing that covers acquisition and growth, a head of product marketing, and a head of revenue ops and analytics, all really focused on the different areas that we need within the organization. And then I'd say, from an awareness and brand strategy, really doesn't matter if you're going on the self-serve funnel or if you're going on a sales assisted. That's not how customers work. And so their job, truly essentially remains the same in just driving the right awareness within our target market. When we get to our revenue team, our acquisition and growth team, we do essentially have team members that are focused on understanding the different ways that our customers will align down the funnel. And so while we don't have two different teams, we do have specialized roles that we're looking to stand up, such as somebody that is focused solely on freemium and working within our product-led growth model, versus a team member that's focused on sales, outbound, and demand generation. They are definitely different roles that you need within that part of the organization. But while it's all under one umbrella, is really because this is our revenue marketing function that drives revenue across the board. And the big thing that I kept coming back to is that at the end of the day, when you think about how you acquire a customer and how customers come in, you can only manage so much of the customer experience. And it's really about providing value. And so if we stand up a lead nurture sequence that helps somebody essentially self-serve on their own, but they want to be assisted and they align to every part of your ideal customer journey, then we want to make sure we make it easier for them in doing that. And so those skill sets are translatable regardless of how the revenue is coming in.
No, that makes total sense. I mean, it's also if you have only a part of the team kind of managing one part of the funnel, it also makes it harder to manage, I guess, and having like one team spirit. And so thanks for the detailed answer. So you mentioned kind of already part of the teams that you're putting together. So what was there already? And what have you set up since you came in? So let me quick. So you said revenue marketing, product marketing, brand and communication, and revenue ops, if I understood that correctly.
Exactly.
Yeah. Exactly. So can you break those down, and like what was there when you arrived, and what was your thinking in kind of setting up those four departments, or was it already like this when you came in?
Definitely not. I'd say when I first came in, the team was primarily structured in two areas. So one would be demand generation as a whole. And I was very lucky that, I've been working with a demand generation team that was already delivering some incredible results when it comes to trials and, the traditional MQLs. And so that was a well-oiled machine that just needed additional kind of refinement and growth as we think about scalability. We also have our own internal design and video team that focuses a lot on the production. The biggest thing I'd say that I saw when I first came in, though, is that those teams were amazing, and everybody that I thankfully, have the opportunity to serve and to work with and to help scale did function separately. And so it kind of worked within the pattern of, work comes in and then we focus on our key KPI, which is just trials, and making sure that you get that revenue function really is successfully modeling. But the biggest thing I saw within that is that, we needed to scale and we needed to start building out our awareness and our brand, as well as, truly building out a product marketing team where we again have an amazing product marketer, but she only has so much time in the day. And so starting to think about how do you compound some of those results across the board. So I'd say that the two areas that, didn't exist previous to me coming in that we're starting to build out. One was the brand and communication side, and really creating an outcome-focused team around how do we start to build more awareness and get people into the funnel versus just focused on demand. And then two is that role of revenue ops and analytics that we talked about. So we did have a marketing ops manager previously on the team, but we've never truly looked at the entire funnel as it aligns to revenue and the impact that marketing brings in. I'm a big believer that at the end of the day, we aren't just responsible for a KPI, we're responsible for the business outcomes and our partnership with the rest of the org. And so for me, that means having a really great partner that's not just looking at the numbers and not just looking at the systems, but challenging them and spending the time in the strategy so that as we continue to scale, we do it intentionally. Because there's only so much you can do within that scrappiness of hiring based off of gut to when you hire based off of data and based off of where you see the biggest opportunities. What's a big bet versus where do you just functionally need to hire? And that's a big part of what this team is kind of working to stand up. And so that was a big part of looking into the org, is again, thinking about not where we are today, but where do we want to be 5 years from now? And what structure do we need that really helps get us to that level?
That's interesting. Like the revenue ops part. So how is that structured inside teamwork? So is this, you have like a partner in marketing or or product or sales? Like how does that work? How do these revenue ops work together? Is that all under your roof or how is that structured?
It's such a great question. And we are deep in the weeds right now in figuring out a lot of how it's structured. And I think you can slice and dice this a lot of different ways in different businesses. In some organizations, you've got a full RevOps team that's part of one team, either under a finance team or under a CRO or a chief revenue officer. For us, it's a partnership and really a squad model. And so what we started to see is, or what I saw too when I came in, is that marketing wasn't necessarily looking at the revenue. impact of everything, but there was a breakdown between what marketing was reporting on versus what sales was reporting on versus what we were looking at within success in different parts of the business. And it's not an avenue of, the team wasn't necessarily doing it. It's an avenue of really breaking down the data that exists and making sure that we're all looking at the same numbers and that we're all aligned around the same business outcomes. And so part of bringing, our first team member onto this team was to help stand up some of that squad model so that we're partnering together with our sales operations team member, our product data team member that also is aligned to data science, our finance team that's working on a lot of our business planning and a lot of our projections for how we achieve some of our financial goals, and together working on what does the revenue ops ongoing cadence need to look like for how we're looking at our data. If we see something that's kind of a little off in one area of the business, are we aligning that to our partners in the business to make sure that when we're reporting in our monthly business reviews or quarterly business reviews or to a board, are we all looking at the same data and creating consistent stories when it comes to how we're driving the funnel? And so that's part of where, it can be part of one team. That's not how it is with us. With us, it's really standing up a squad model. And eventually, maybe they do become a part of one team. But at the end of the day, they have to operate as if they're one team, because my success is, only a part of the puzzle. It's really my goal as a CMO is to focus on the business, to partner with sales, to partner with product and the entire organization, which starts and ends in the data and making sure that you've got that consistency across the board.
Can you elaborate a bit further on the, before we move on into the function of revenue ops? Let's maybe stay within the marketing and sales realm for this one. A company who doesn't have RevOps today, can you quickly explain when you think is the right moment for RevOps to kind of be its own function or even part-time function inside the company, and what does RevOps do in a company, and what is its KPI basically?
Sure. And I think it does depend on the way you're stood up. I can speak to the way that we are, is we've got a team member in sales operations and a team member in marketing that we've brought in, and they really need to work together on looking at the data. And so it really starts with an analyst, I would say, is the critical part that you're really standing up. And sometimes your leader is also an analyst based on the different stages you are within a business. And so when it comes to, when do you bring this person on and how do you determine how you scale this? I think a part of it is dependent on the size of your organization and making sure that you've got the skill sets that digs into the data and making sure that you're not just making decisions at face value, but you're able to dig into how things are moving and that you're aligned across, what revenue actually looks like. And so if I were to break that down into what marketing does versus what sales does, for us, we're probably looking at all of our channels and how they're performing. And so when we talk about us being, fully trial and freemium focused, a very product-led organization, we want to look at everything from paid to email lead nurturing to organic and the way our website is converting and all of the different areas of focus that we have within the marketing engine and how those are driving essential efficiency across the board. Do we have better trials coming from paid versus organic? What countries are they converting from? What lead nurture strategies do we have in place that drive stronger conversion across the board so that as we start to continue to look at our numbers, we understand how things are moving through and what's driving stronger revenue? When do you need to focus on quantity versus when do you need to focus on quality? And if you're down, what levers do you start to pull to focus on making sure that you make the right bets and that you can continue to put those big bets in place, but at the same time, build the operating machine that your department is necessary to build out. On the sales side, we're really looking at that later stage in the bottom of funnel conversion. And so, our sales operations and analyst team member is focused a lot more on aging leads, how things are moving through the CRM, based on the lead quality that we have coming on. If you have an SDR, a sales development team, and an AE team, how are they partnered across the lead handoff and the different conversion that's happening at the later stage of the sales funnel. We're also focused a lot on lead quality. And so do a lot of win-loss analysis between, where we're losing, why we're losing within the competitors. And together, we're really partnered on looking at, that overarching story. And so when I'm reporting on our results from the month, we want to make sure that our marketing activities are generating the right pipeline, that pipeline is generating the right opportunities that then close to revenue. And that sounds simple. It's often not simple within your business, because that gets down into not just the data and the spreadsheets, but it also gets into really understanding your technology, your tech stack that you have across the board, how these things partner together. And then if you're a SaaS organization, you're caring about product adoption and if people are actually leveraging different parts of the product that you're trying to drive them through. And so all of that can be messy. And so the function of that org is to help detangle and help simplify the way that we can look at the results and the outcomes and then determine we see something off in this area. Why?
Right.
And to answer those questions together.
This is awesome. It also it gives you an ability to kind of tell the full story, right? If someone asks, and not just bits and pieces of it. If we kind of zoom out a little bit and look at your career trajectory, I guess you've started out as a practitioner yourself and had various leadership roles and are now at the stage where you are at the CMO level, on a lot of the listeners of this podcast, they're kind of up and coming leaders and have probably been practitioners 2-3 years ago and are now kind of coming into leadership roles and are managing sometimes 2, sometimes 5, up to 10 people. What are some of the major mindset shifts for you that have enabled you to kind of go through this journey from kind of being a practitioner to a CMO? Because I assume that a lot of people listening to this are kind of aspiring to a similar trajectory.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, so much. How to narrow that down. I think it first depends on what kind of job you take when it comes into being a leader. I've lived in the stages where, you're deep in the startup mode as a marketing leader, which is very different than when you're working at a business that's more at growth stage and you're trying to figure out how you're scaling. So I'll kind of speak to the common denominators that I think I've found in all of those areas. And looking back, every year I learn a little bit more. And I think the first thing by far that I've learned is you don't know what you don't know and don't pretend to. I think when you're early in your career, there's a lot of imposter syndrome that comes into being in these different stages where you're taking on leadership roles and you feel like you are responsible for having to know all the things. And I think that one of the biggest shifts that I saw at some stage in my career, and I still live in this sometimes, right, is that feeling of having to have an answer and not having the answer. And then, being scared or being worried about what if I don't answer this right? And so I think that shift is when I was able to recognize that you don't know what you don't know, but you can get that answer. And so sometimes the best answer is, that's a great question. I don't actually know that right now, but I'll find out. And then you come back and make sure that you follow through on finding out. And so that's a big one, is regardless of where you are in your career, you'll never have all the answers. And you're also not expected to. And I think that's part of mindset shift number 2 is just because you can doesn't mean you should. And I think that's a thing that I've struggled with at every different stage of my career, is you get to a point in your career or in leadership that you're there because you have that experience and because you've done these things before. And that is great when you're leading a team, because you're able to help in talking the talk and understanding the language. But that's not your job anymore. Your job is to actually help empower and serve the people that work with you to grow in their career and help them scale up. And so as you think about that, just because I can doesn't mean I should. You have to really think through delegation and not doing it in a micromanagey, I need somebody to do this thing kind of way. But how do you empower the people when you don't have an answer to help you find that answer and to recognize that, that's their job and your job is to help serve them continue to grow. And so I think I try to connect those things together very often in more of this servant leadership approach of not coming in and dictating and not coming in and trying to answer all the things or live in imposter syndrome and feel like I had to have them, and instead recognize that I'm way better when I hire people so much smarter than me to help us get to the end result that we're trying to drive to. Because a lot of the times when you get beyond that startup stage and into the growth stage, your job is to know, but it's also to be the communicator and to also empower and scale and build teams, which is very different than being the person that's actually doing the work. Don't get me wrong, I still love doing the work sometimes. And I love those days where I can roll up my sleeves and write an email nurture sequence or do something that kind of fills that marketer in me. But I think that's been a big shift, is recognizing that importance of serving and that importance of kind of living within that space of you don't have to have all the answers. That's what you have a great team there to help you continue to grow and scale from. What else? I think those are the first two. Any questions on those before I keep rattling off?
I think for the second one, what I kind of saw happening a lot as well is that the organization, especially in scale ups, like the organization often grows faster than like you as a person are growing, and there is a lot of pressure. Like all of a sudden, I'm a manager, I'm a leader. I need to incorporate all those principles that you just mentioned, while I'm kind of transitioning from being a practitioner to a manager as well. Where do you get your education from in this kind of transition period? Like, do you call up other people, kind of peers that are in a similar situation, or do you have some mentors? Are you reading leadership books? Like, what kind of got you through this this transition? I guess once you've done it once, you have a better understanding of what the difference is. But kind of, how was your first transition? If you can kind of bring us back to that.
Yeah, all of the above. And honestly, I think that's part of, you do learn, but you're always learning and you're always growing and always kind of drinking from the fire hose. Even right now, I'm a first-time CMO. And so I am not taking that for granted. I spend so much time networking and just connecting with other people in the industry, asking questions, being vulnerable, recognizing that there's other people out there that have probably gone through some of the same challenges or even seen some of the same wins. And you're so much stronger the more you can compound your education. And so I've added into my own schedule a ton of rituals, and where at least twice a week, I'm networking with someone or having some kind of conversation. And sometimes that's me asking questions. Sometimes that's me giving back too. I'll always connect with somebody reaching out, trying to grow in their own career, because I have been so lucky and fortunate to have people that have also helped me out along the way. I have a group, my Shine Crew, and they are everything to me, in that we've got, bi-weekly check-ins with each other. We've known each other for years. It kind of started and evolved into this group of colleagues that I just admire so much, and also can very closely call them some of my best friends at this stage too, where, I think finding your own Shine Crew and your own group of mentors to kind of spend time with is so critical. And then you mentioned reading. I am reading day in and day out as much as I possibly can. And much like everyone else, I will have my moments where sometimes that is a fiction book And sometimes that's a business book, but I'm always trying to do a little bit of both. And I have young kids that has been really hard to do at certain stages of my own career. And so adding in rituals like going for a walk and digesting an audiobook or a podcast and spending time just constantly consuming my brain. What's been kind of one of the most fascinating things I've learned, similar to your question on, what are the mindset shifts, is I actually learned the more that I do less, the more effective I can become. And often that means if I'm stuck or if I'm in a position to where I'm feeling exhausted or like I have a lot going on, getting outside and going for a walk and listening to a book is sometimes how I can get my mind organized and think through what are the ways other people are solving some of these challenges that I'm trying to solve, whether it's through a marketing tactic or whether it's through leadership. And so every time I've got areas that I'm trying to focus on within my own growth, I'll just try to consume as much as possible to help continue to grow and, build my brain. And I find that that's something that has just, been time and time again, just such a huge avenue of just growth across the board.
Have you developed principles for yourself in your kind of leadership function and how you are thinking about leading teams or parts of the organization that you're working at?
Absolutely. I'll start. One of the biggest principles that I think have been helpful, one for me and hopefully for my teams that I lead, is that I'm a big believer of, showing the rest time is just as important as work time. And so while I spend a lot of time on education, I also will try to very intentionally set my hours and stick to them, and very intentionally make sure that I've got time dedicated to taking care of my own mental health so that I can lead by example. And I think that that's really important when you think about growing and scaling a team. There's so much, we have such a culture of overworking sometimes and stretching ourselves too thin, which leads to so much burnout. And we've seen that in really difficult ways over this last year in particular. And so I think one of those principles for me, outside of just my leadership skills and wanting to constantly be educating and making sure I'm spending time networking, is also making sure I'm spending time on me and then bringing that back to the team that I work with so that we can all bring our whole selves to work.
I mean, it also allows, if your team sees that you're doing that, it also allows your team to kind of like, oh, okay,
exactly.
That's something that's okay to do.
Yeah.
Okay, so taking time for yourself or kind of showing, leading by example, like what are some other principles that you would say like you're leading by?
So we introduce, and I'm a big believer of introducing, you've got values within your organization, and those are usually your organizational values. I also believe in norms, and that's a principle that I hope to bring to the team as well, is what are the things that we want to bring into our day-to-day. And so a big one that I would say really aligns to your question also on, what are the things that you've learned, is avoid yes. And making sure that especially within a marketing organization, you can focus with intention and kind of bringing that to the team and not jumping into execution mode and not jumping into yes mode. I've yet to meet an organization that doesn't have that challenge that everybody has a thought on what they think marketing should be doing, or an idea or something that, can bring us to this next level or do this next thing. And I think it's really important that you own your strategy and then you stick to it. And I've learned that one the hard way I am an achiever through and through in my own DNA. And so really like to get things done, to cross them off lists and to move. And I've learned a lot about the importance of doing that, but doing that with intention, saying less to yes, and focusing on owning your strategy and then seeing that strategy through so that you can showcase the way that you essentially are driving your results. And so avoiding yes is a really important principle, I think, in showing the team like it's okay to say no, but do it in a way where you can bring people along the ride, which I guess then leads to the other principle that I have, is just over communicating. Like, I think over communicating as not just a marketer, but as a leader is so important, there's a book that I often refer to, a lot of people do, Radical Candor. And the author, Kim Scott, has this analogy that I always come back to, where when you're a leader, you're kind of standing in the middle, and imagine you're waving around a lasso and you're in the middle of the lasso and waving it. Your team is often on the end of that lasso, flailing along, kind of going along with you for the work that you're doing. And so over communicating and bringing them in to what you're doing, in whether that's through why you're executing the work that you're executing to help saying no later on down the road,
right,
or why you're prioritizing something that people might not truly understand, or giving education on why you're working on something. Like that over communication is so critical to helping organizations realize the strategy that marketing is working on, and to also bring them into understanding the impact that you're driving, because it's so easy to just expect or assume that people will see your results and then just think like, oh, they got this. People want to know why, and they want to know what you're working on. And I think you just have to assume that they don't, so that you can help bring them into seeing and realizing that vision together.
Yeah, I mean, the over communication part has been a big issue in my career for sure. I just assumed like I start communicating once it's like complete or like close to complete a project. I mean, from practitioner to later leading team. So that was an issue, but that was also like something that I started realizing is having a focused roadmap that actually kind of fosters this clarity and enables one to say no, because then you can actually say, no, I'm doing actually this and this and this and not this. Like, how do you arrive at a focused roadmap that you can, I guess, over communicate with clarity?
Yeah, I love that question. So first and foremost, it is, making sure that you've got your goals, making sure that you know what your outcomes are, and that you're starting to work your way backwards from those. And so there's big ideas and big bets and all the creative things that you want to and can do within your organization. But you have to first look and establish what are the things that we absolutely have to do this year. And that's where, as I mentioned with our team, we're focused on kind of an outcome-based team. And so each of those teams has a goal, whether it's driving an increase in awareness by X%, or driving this many trials, or this percent increase in conversion. It's really understanding the board, what are the things that we want to achieve by the end of this year, but then also what are we working towards over the next 3 to 5 years. And yes, some of that is fluid based on, how you're performing, what's going on in the world, but it does help establish your baseline to what you're working through. And then there's a lot of brainstorming. So I'll spend a lot of time with our teams. We're deep in it right now for our Q3 prioritization focus. And so we work within Teamwork off of the EOS model, or the EOS operating model, where you essentially establish what's called rocks. It's very similar to OKRs or NGOs or whichever acronym you want with your business operating model. But for us, we focus on that kind of this rule of 3, where if you have less than or more than 3 priorities, you don't have any. And so it's generally looking at, based on our outcomes, 1, what's the recurring work that you just do on an ongoing basis? And that has to be the foundation of how you then scale and build your team. 2, what are the gaps based off of that? And so when you think about recurring work, like, use a really good example, blog articles. There's a certain amount of content that we know every single week we need to be producing. There's a certain amount of emails that we're optimizing on an ongoing basis. And so they're going to get you to a certain degree of that outcome. What is the next thing that you want to layer onto that big bet or the big idea that is essentially the thing that you want to start working on quarter over quarter? And we break that up into kind of these different stages. And so based on how big that project is, if it's a huge brand initiative or launch that's going to require a lot of resourcing or a lot of bets across the board, then you might want to look at a Q1 and a Q2, or a Q3 and a Q4 plan between when you're planning versus when you're launching. And essentially in this like deep brainstorming that we're doing with all of our functional leaders, we're looking at the big bets that we want to put in place and then doing a lot of debate. We're scrubbing down what are the things that we have capacity for based on our own system. What are the things that we maybe want to try, but we're not ready to put that amount of effort into the actual work to see if the impact is worth it, and then start moving. And so for us, it's the prioritization of quarterly focus that's aligned to X number of rocks that we're working on across the team. But then two, it's like what you call the messy middle. And so you can come up with the big idea, but the big idea is only going to get you so far, because then the messy middle is like when that work hits the road. And that's where project management comes in. I mean, I'm biased here in that I obviously work as a CMO for a project management platform, but it's part of what got me excited about working for Teamwork, because I am a process junkie. And so for me, living in the messy middle and starting to stand up capacity planning and utilization and figuring out how do we make sure that we've got the right amount of work across the board aligned to what we're trying to accomplish. And then, whenever we kick off a project, we kick it off with an essential team that puts in place. When we end a project, we look at what did we set out to do? Did we do the thing? If we didn't, that's okay, because often there's a learning goal. What did we learn though? So that we can continue to iterate as we move forward. So again, like that, I'd say the prioritization and the roadmap, like you said, is critical, and that you kind of align towards what your goals are that you're looking at for the end of the year. But making sure you get that project management and messy middle really figured out so that you don't suddenly have 5,000 hours of design time and only 100 hours available is where the rubber hits the road.
And that's also when the kind of internal burnout sets in, right? When you're not really planning and people are staying late and because these big rocks have been defined, but the messy middle, the process is not, right? Yeah. Yeah. So, and then how does, like, within the this system, like, how do you measure people's performances, or like how do you address KPIs on a team versus on an individual basis? Like, how does that work in this system? Is it? Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Is it the same as in OKRs? Or is it a different system?
Similar. Everybody has a KPI, and that is dependent on what their essential role is. Sometimes it's more qualitative than it is quantitative, depending on the role itself, if you're a creative versus a demand generation marketer. But for the most part, our entire department has our top level KPIs that we're responsible for, and then each individual team has a goal that ladders into that. And so we have what we call these weekly level 10 meetings where we all get together and we look at our numbers. And so our production team, for example, is looking at how we're essentially estimating versus delivering on the time that we're essentially putting in place. Or we'll be looking at, if we're our video team on a production side, how many views, how many conversions are coming from, that type of content as we're driving together. And then, of course, if you're, on the demand side, we're focused a lot more on like how many trials did we create in MQLs. And so a lot of it is aligned to role, but we do try to create clarity for each person in the department on what their role is responsible for helping that drives up to that big picture engine. And then there's, of course, the marketing leadership and then the company leadership meetings where we're looking at those top line KPIs. And so each functional leader is responsible for working within their teams on what are the team KPIs that help achieve the departmental KPIs, that help achieve the business level KPIs. And we live in them weekly. So every week we're looking at these numbers within each one of our teams to really understand week over week, month over month, and general alignment against projections.
Interesting. I think actually, this really fits into one question that we got asked out of the community. I'm quoting. I'm currently working on the team rituals I should put in place now that the team is crossing the 10 plus people threshold and expanding geographically. Until now, we ran using agile methodology, sprint planning, review, retrospective, daily syncs, etc. This will now happen in subgroups because of the size. I therefore have to find out what rituals can help us retain and share our team culture and make sure communication flows. Can you elaborate your thoughts on making that transition?
Yeah, and it's tough, especially as you're growing and scaling your team, to make sure that you've got rituals sorted out, because I think as you scale, you actually end up creating more noise in meetings or duplicate meetings when it comes to the how we work, because you have to really balance the how you're executing and how you're working efficiently within your production, and then also how you're scaling and growing the team as you're going through these growth stages. So I look at this two different ways. So the first one is what it sounds like that question, the person that asked the question has stood up right now, is an agile methodology where we're looking at, actual how work gets done, whether it's in a weekly sprint or an every 2 week sprint. And that gets into the day-to-day, like the messy middle that we talked about. Then there's also this ritual that, is a critical ritual, I think, for our leadership team, and then even the individual teams when it comes into team plannings and it comes into strategy and results and how we're essentially doing against the business. That time that you can speak to not just the what we're doing that you do in your sprint plannings, but the why, and also the what if. All those things that come in from different areas that I'm saying say no to, but someone's got to communicate it and figure out how to prioritize. And so that's where those level 10 meetings come in. So we actually have a tool. It's a free tool, so anyone can use it if they want, called Instant Agency Tools, that we actually built aligned to the EOS operating model, where it helps put in that leadership discussion where you dig into, one, spending time and looking at your scorecard, two, what are top headlines that you need to cascade of things that are happening within the business, within the department, that each functional head can bring back to their teams so that it's not essentially trying to get everyone involved in all the things at once. But three, most importantly, what are the issues that you're dealing with right now? And this is where a big area of why this is helpful for me is that, it's impossible to answer all the issues that come in on a day-to-day basis, or even in individualized one-on-ones, because that's where you'll end up missing some conversations that need to happen with people communicating within your team. And so I try to get in the habit of saying, like, hey, is this urgent? If it's something that comes to me, if not, add it to the issues list in the L10. And then when we all get together as a team, sometimes that list is so long, you can't get to everything. And so there's a mechanism where we'll spend a minute voting on the top issues. That way, everyone has that opportunity to ladder up the most important things for us to talk through, and then just live in that uncomfortable space of, what are the things that we need to dig into? Is this something we need to take action on right now? Or is this something that we add to a deeper, we're going to figure this out in our next quarter prioritization, if it's a big enough issue still. But that space where you can get the team together and talk through some of those big priorities that you need to focus on. And that helps keep the team kind of rolling and moving. And then I also do generally have, and this gets to when your team is probably a little bigger than 10, because an L10 would probably work with, and level 10 actually means scoring the meeting on a 0 to 10. You want it to be 8 or above. But when you're more than, 10 to 15 people, it's impossible to constantly get everyone together to talk through how things are moving, all the top headlines, having a marketing all hands or something in place, whether that's monthly or bi-monthly, where you can just get everyone together to make sure you're communicating those updates. The last thing I would add in, and then I'll stop blabbing on this one, but I, again, am a process nerd, so love a good process. I send out weekly emails to my entire team on just letting them know things that are going on. So every Wednesday, I will always send out an update where it gets into, this is how we're performing as a department. Here are some of the, big shout outs that we have of people doing an awesome job, so you can bring in recognition. And here's what we're talking about at the leadership level within the organization to help people understand those things that are going on that they might not be involved in the day-to-day. Again, bringing them into that lasso. And I would say that's probably one of the most beneficial things that I hear from the team often is because, we're not getting a meeting to give them updates. I'm just sending in communications out once a week on how things are going. I learned that from my previous CMO, and it goes a long way. So I think even little things like that are huge.
No, love it. I think that's we start during my time at Apple. That was my boss at the time did that, and it was so effective. I mean, it was, and then I just learned the value of it once I didn't have it anymore at the company I was working at after. And so I'm glad actually you sprinkled that in. I think that's a super important, as you say, kind of a small thing, but a super effective thing to do.
Yeah.
Now, sorry. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I was going to add, the other thing I would add to this one too is ask for feedback. And that's the part that is so critical when it comes to even rituals in particular is you ask the people that are on the floor that are in the rituals that are actually doing the day-to-day, because they're probably going to tell you a lot more also about what's working and what's not working. And so we have, our quarterly surveys that go out to the team, but I also do skip levels with everyone in the organization at least once a quarter and just check in on how things are going, run a quarterly retrospective on what's working, what's not working, what should we think about doing next, and using a lot of that feedback as a way to also refine. And right now we're in deep ritual refinement consistently because there's a lot of change happening. And so that means that I'm not the one that's going to come in and just say, hey, here's all the change, now go do it. I want to make sure that the people I'm working with and that we're doing it together, that we're all part of that solution. So don't be afraid to also ask your team what's working and what's not working, because I'm sure that they'll also have really good recommendations.
Love that. In terms of, I think one question that comes up a lot is the kind of what do you keep in-house versus what do you outsource to agencies or freelancers or whatnot, or even have part-time people coming on a contractor basis. How do you evaluate these situations? Do you have certain criteria that need to be met in order for it to be eligible for outsourcing? Or do you have specific specific channels or specific functions where it just makes sense, or specific situations? How do you differentiate? How do you take these kind of decisions?
Yeah, it's a great question and a tricky one, because I do think a lot of it does depend also on stage and where you're at within your business. I am a big believer of contractors and working with outsourced agencies as you're looking to scale your team. It's a lot easier from a financial perspective to look at, starting to scale based off of proving out with contractors if you find the right people on the team. And so if you're new and you're starting up and in that startup stage, your first few hires are definitely people that are more generalists for the most part and have transferable skills across the board. There's still a place for needing specialists. And so I think the way that I would generally always think about this is almost in that T-shaped marketing mindset of, if you have a generalist on the team that's really great at doing some things, understand other areas, but they need to compound their abilities, then helping them do that with just partnering with contractors or agencies is a great way to get some things off the ground and running if you're on a limited budget for hiring. And that would be probably the first step is, who do you have? What skill sets are you missing? And then based off of those skill sets, is that something that you can partner with an agency or with a contractor or an additional resource to help you achieve the goals that you're trying to achieve? Often, I think teams can just preface to immediately jump to the hiring more in-house talent without necessarily having a full-time in-house role ready. And so, you can look at contract to hire, but I often look at contractors as bring on somebody that has the experience and can help us achieve the things that we want to, prove that out. And then when you have that proven out, you can look at bringing somebody on full time to then own that discipline, whether it's within something like SEO or whether that's within something like conversion rate optimization. I think that's a great way to start looking at how do you prove out the areas that you want to stand up without that risk of bringing on somebody full time that either A, needs to learn, B, is extremely expensive because specialists are very expensive. And when you're in startup stage, you need more of the generalists probably than the specialists. And then when you're in growth stage, it's almost the same narrative, but for a different way. So because part of what happens when you get to a stage where your team is 50 or above is that you're no longer hiring based off of just gut or based off of need. Is like, oh, we don't have someone doing email. Let's hire an email marketer. No brainer. You also get to a stage where you have to start figuring out, oh, we've got 10 headcount this year. How do we break up that 10 headcount against all of our different needs? Because each team has 10 people that they want to hire. And so a lot of that comes into figuring out what are the big bets or the areas that are critical that you need to invest in within your business. Are you moving up market? Do you need an enterprise marketer? That's when you want to invest in bringing in that full-time headcount to focus on those areas versus the flexibility of freelance budget, which is a lot easier to essentially work with your finance team on. And so I think there is that equal balance of figuring out what skill sets you have and then compounding that with, additional freelancers or contractors, or then 2, proving out if there's roles that you want within the department to make it a no-brainer based off of the results that you're trying to achieve and drive, or then 3, making sure that you can kind of find creative ways to achieve all the roles you want to hire for the ones that are necessary, and then outsource the ones that, you can afford to outsource.
Right. No, I think that's a really good distinction. And as you said, I forgot to mention it. Obviously, it depends a lot on the stage you are at. So thanks for making that distinction. I think in terms of like when we say, so as I said, like a lot of people who are listening to this maybe have a team of like 5 people, 10 people in their team. How do you think about kind of the hiring? Obviously, again, depends a lot on like the type of business exactly, but let's just say B2B SaaS kind of target customer, kind of larger SME to enterprise, for example. Like what is kind of the sequence you would hire the team in? So maybe even let's include agency and freelancers. Like what are the functions that you would focus on early on? Because it's also a lot about like, if I see it my own experience, like hire functional leaders to complement my own kind of deficiencies in certain areas, right? So how do you think about that in these kind of earlier stages?
Absolutely. So exactly what you said. First, hire people that, one, as I said earlier, are smarter than you in certain areas where you mentioned none of us are the through and through well-rounded perfect marketer. There's definitely areas that you're a specialist in, and then there's areas where you need to partner. I think when you're in that earlier stage, a lot of it does fit within the demand and acquisition world that you want to have in-house, because that's what your investors care about. That's what your financial model cares about, and really critical. Areas that I tend to see outsourced a lot more in the earlier stages, maybe your public relations, PR. There are so many great PR agencies that can do a lot of what you need if PR is a big part of your strategy. Certain digital agencies that might work in areas like SEO, for example, or SEM, really great ways where you can look at bringing in specialists that are really, really great within that discipline that, your functional leaders then can manage. And so even coming into teamwork, one of the first steps I did is brought in a leadership team to help scale the rest of our team. And then I'm working with each of them on what their hiring plan will look like over the next 3 to 5 years. And I can give a roadmap on, hey, this is where I think we have gaps, but I also want them to kind of have that space to make some of those decisions. And so I think, one, your core leadership team is really important that you have in-house. Don't outsource that. But two, as you think through specialists or areas that you just need to go and hit the ground running, that's when a contractor, an agency, a freelancer becomes really helpful. Content's another area. I've outsourced that in every organization. So I think having a copywriter or a content marketer on your team makes a ton of sense. But when you're doing a lot of content, like we are, because we are a very inbound-esque model, we have a ton of freelancers that we work with that help with content. And it was really similar at Sprout as well.
That's interesting. Thanks for sharing that. I think like one important part of all of this that I want to mention in every podcast is how to make sure early on to tie everything we do to revenue. So that's why I also loved that you called, actually is one of the department, or one of your departments is called revenue marketing. Do you call it that way internally? Because I think that's actually genius.
It's actually, I wish I could say that. We actually got 3 names. So it's our acquisition and growth team, but we refer to them as the revenue marketing team.
Yeah, awesome. Because I think like a lot of the, I don't know how I should say that, like fancy stuff or like fun stuff we can do kind of, we need to prove our worth first, because as you said, like everyone has their kind of opinions on what marketing can and should do in the beginning. And so kind of proving that revenue early on, I think is super important. So we are nearing the end of our conversation. Is there some sagely advice that you would like to impart into up and coming B2B marketing leaders specifically? Maybe things that, or something that you wish you would have known when you started out?
That's a great question. 2 things. Well, 3. I'll give 3 pieces of advice that I would leave with anyone that's listening that's up and coming. The first one is network. Don't be afraid to network. It has been, such a great benefit for me and my career, and how I've been able to learn from people that I admire, put myself out there, even in that really scary, uncomfortable space of asking people if they would be willing to just talk and, share some advice as I was learning. It's really opened up a lot of, 1, opportunity, but 2, just my own knowledge and growth within the world when it comes to marketing, but when it comes to leadership. And so networking is definitely an area where I would say, don't be afraid to do that. Join communities, get engaged with people that you admire, and spend time learning from them, because it has definitely been something that I continue to take with me everywhere. Second is education, just continuing to learn, whether that's reading, whether it's listening to audiobooks or podcasts, and just making sure that you've got the time to focus on the areas that either A, you're getting feedback on, or B, you just want to continue to challenge yourself to learn. There's so much to learn, and there's areas like there's a book or an audiobook or a podcast or anything out there that will help you as you continue to just open up your horizons. And then the third one, which is more of just, I guess, a piece of advice outside of the known things that you should be doing, which is turn, I guess, frustrations into opportunities. And that's been a big one that I've learned at different stages of my career when things have gotten hard, because things get hard sometimes and things can feel like you're walking in mud or you're living in, a tough place. And so I try to approach every day as a glass half full and as, a opportunity mentality, because otherwise you can just get so sucked in to all the things and not into the opportunities in front of you. And so I think that that's a really, really important one. And then I have a bonus piece of advice on top of that. Bonus advice is prioritize your mental health. That's probably the one thing that has transformed my career in a lot of times. Like when I was younger, I would pour all of my energy, all of my efforts, everything into my job. And for a long time, my job became my identity. And that was really, really hard. And I wasn't the happiest version of me. I wasn't the healthiest version of me. And so when I started focusing on where we talked about earlier, doing less, but being really impactful in the time that I do focus on work, making sure I've got my time to exercise if that's your thing, or, be energized by being outdoors, or focus on family time, whatever the thing is that helps you prioritize your own mental health. That makes me a better boss, a better leader, a better wife. And so I think just making sure that you put yourself, as hard as that can be, at the epicenter of everything you're doing, it makes everything else so much easier and so much more impactful to the way that you can impact your days.
Yeah, thanks for saying that, because I think while we all, think we should do it, or it somehow in the moment feels counterintuitive, right? And totally. I think like you sharing this kind of allows maybe the listeners who hear this, or people who see this, to that it's actually a good strategy as well. Like, even if you're thinking from a strategic mindset, it's a good thing to do.
Totally.
So
I struggle with it every day still. I am an inbox zero person, and I have not been able to achieve inbox zero in months, and it absolutely kills me. But at the same time, I know my mental energy will just be absorbed if I try to focus on that part of me that I just have to walk away from and be okay with it, because otherwise I can't get the other things done that I need to.
Thanks a lot, Tara. I think that's a great place to end our conversation. It was a great pleasure, and I hope we can do this again sometime soon. And where can people find you? And so it's teamwork.com, right?
Yep, teamwork.com.
And then where can people find you? Are you on the social webs, or where can...
That's great. I'm on all the social networks. And so I'll make it easy. My handle is at Tara E. Robertson on every single social network. So awesome. You can find me on LinkedIn, on Twitter, on Instagram, all the places with that social handle. Please reach out. And thank you so much. This has been a really fun conversation.
Thank you. Likewise. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.